But pausing with Danielle, what will we do next with her? Like, what is the thing, what's the change on a student and a teacher level that we feel like we need to see happen in her classroom? And what's going to be our plan of making that happen?
Okay. So, I think two things, like, off the bat have to happen. The disconnect needs to evaporate between this ELA being taught in isolation and writing being taught completely separate. And so the ELA and writing disconnect.
So
right now,
you're talking about the teacher level change. The way she's instructing ELA and writing has to become more rigorous, basically. Right. And you're going to describe that in a few minutes about like the steps you're going to take for that. But that's the big change that has to happen for this teacher.
Okay, and
how does that
student achievement based daily objectives that she ties into short-term and long-term goals. Like there has to be lesson level investment. You know what I'm saying? Like changing it from the question to students will be able to do something. Okay. And then within the lesson, tying that thing they'll be able to do into their short-term, end-of-the-year academic goals and that long-term, further out goals.
Okay. So I think that's a part of the teacher change. Like, you're going to have to help Danielle learn, how do I take a writing ELA lesson, craft an appropriate lesson plan with a specific kind of objective that I'm going to hone in for the day? Mm-hmm. How do I make sure that my kids... how do I make sure I am teaching in a way that's going to actually get at that objective as opposed to teaching towards a broad question where I don't really get a gauge of what my students can do or know? Okay, so that's like a part of the teacher level change. How will that trickle down into students at the end of the day? So when we think about, even Dontavius or some of the other students that students in that high group, who I just depicted as not being fully invested in the class, or even the students in the group at the Promethean board who they knew they were supposed to be doing something, but they weren't really doing what they needed to be doing. Like, how does this new level of rigor with writing connect to what we saw on the student level? Like, what would be the change that we want to see?
So, fundamentally, students, and the change is going to come from, like, what I would hear the students saying.
Or potentially what they're doing differently.
Right. And then the other piece
or how they're performing.
Actually seeing a change in the writing.
Yeah. I mean, I think that is where I would want to start. Like, if we saw different student writing after a period of time, and I think you and Danielle need to come up with a timeline together and figure out what's the right appropriate amount of time after you've taken some of the teacher actions to change her practice. I would expect to see the writing samples that we're looking at in her classroom be very different at the end of this whole process than the ones we looked at today. So that would give us evidence that the level of rigor where writing is concerned in this classroom has fully changed. I think there is another level of student change that has to happen with just investment, right? Like, the way her kids are talking about her vision in her class and why they're there and what they're doing on a daily basis, they're not connected at all. And I would want to see that. I would want to see students more connected to what they're doing in this classroom. The next time we walk in there, I would want to see, and that means that on the teacher level, we have to do some work with Danielle to get her there. Like, we have to do some work with her to help her invest her kids in her vision, to help her to understand her own vision, so she's leveraging it more in her lessons, in her instruction. Because it just doesn't make sense. This class, they're mastering at such a high level on the basic stuff, right? Mm-hmm. It just doesn't make sense for her kids not to be fully invested in where they're headed, especially if they're seeing so much success, unless that success is not authentic, right? Unless that success doesn't really mean anything to them as students, or unless the success, isn't fully being leveraged for what the possibilities could really bring. So, I mean, if we saw student investment turn around where students could talk about, why what they were doing is important and talk about why, talk about what they're learning in a meaningful way, I think that would be a great indication of student investment turnaround.